I would just like to welcome Jacob, who is up in the public gallery. Jacob is doing a journalism course and has clearly realised that corporate scrutiny is going to be so stunningly entertainment. He's recording it as part of his course. So welcome, Jacob. I think we need to do the fire regs and everything first, don't we? Under a laptop. It's here. So that you're all aware, in case of an emergency, there are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you hear the fire alarm, get out that door and leg it. I'll be in front. Okay, no. So if you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency. Evacuate the building by the nearest safe escape route. So thank you all for attending this evening. I'm hoping that doesn't keep making a noise because it's really annoying. So apologies that we've had so far. I've had apologies from Councillor Warren Drew. He might be able to attend later in the meeting. So I've had apologies at the moment. And I know that Councillor Julie Jones-Evans is going to be here in a while to talk on one of the papers. If she is not here by the time her agenda item has come up, then I will move it down and give her time to attend so she can be here in person to answer questions. And thank you for officers for coming this evening as well. Have we got any? No method.
We also do have apologies from Councillor Simon Cook, and we do have Councillor Nick Stewart substituting for Councillor Michael Lilly.
Thank you. So I wasn't chairing the minutes of the last meeting, so I think it'd be more appropriate if I hand over to Councillor Spink, who was the chair at that meeting, just to confirm the record of the previous minutes, and he would have to sign them off because I wasn't actually chairing the meeting, if that's okay.
Certainly, Chair, I'm happy to do that. I've actually got one matter at least to raise on the minutes. I don't know if anyone has any matters to raise. Councillor Jarman.
Okay. Powered up. It is, of course, at the chair's discretion, but I was present at the last meeting. I was allowed to speak on a couple of items. Those items, I do have some comments on how they've been minuted, and I would seek the indulgence of the chair, or deputy chair in this case, to reply on those minute items and perhaps suggest some corrections to the way that what I said and what was discussed has actually been reported.
Yes, Councillor Jarman, please go ahead. We're both, the chair and I are content with that.
The first item is on page 6, which refers to agenda item 6 of the minutes, and that related to the issue of the progress on the leisure centres. The discussion at that meeting was that a new report was being prepared. It would be discussed and circulated in time to be discussed at this meeting. I don't know if that updated report has been circulated for this meeting. There is a very brief report attached in the papers. It was also noted that the earlier report would be circulated. I again had not seen the earlier report circulated, so I took the liberty, in the absence of that being done, to circulate it immediately prior to this meeting to the members of the committee. They, of course, will not have received that, I assume, from Democratic Services or indeed from me directly. So that may present some difficulty in comparing the situation now with the past document that was done. I would say that the past document was fairly comprehensive, and the new briefing which is proposed in the paper is very limited. The earlier paper had 44 pages of detail, plus appendices on financial aspects, and those financial aspects are quite important to the analysis and the input which is done, including the ongoing subsidies from the council.
So, Jarman, can we add that when we get to the point on the leisure centres? So if we just do an amendment to the minutes that,
okay,
just as you've raised, but we need to actually go into more detail when we get to the point on the leisure centre.
I'll raise it at that point. So that pertains to item 6 in the agenda on the minutes. Also, point 8 on the minutes, there was a discussion about the Ride Town Board. That point specifically, the update that was provided by Chris Ward was noted, and he'd given a fairly comprehensive update, noting that the money was provided to the Isle of Wight Council, and that the role of the Ride Town Board, in his view, was to provide a plan to the Isle of Wight Council, but it would be the Isle of Wight Council which was both dealing with the procurement and the expenditure related to that fund. So I've received and got a copy of Chris Ward's update. I think many of us were present at it. It does not accord with what is currently recorded in the minutes. So I think clarification does need to be sought on what is the actual financial process for defining receiving funds and expending funds against the money provided for the Ride Town Board project.
Councillor Jarman, I hear from across the chamber here some comments no. I think the best way and easiest way of dealing with this would be to look at if you were to suggest how you would seek an amendment to the minutes, and minutes can be approved subject to that amendment, and Melanie here would listen to the tape and ensure that that's an accurate amendment. I think that's the way to deal with it. Otherwise, we're going to end up debating what was said, and that's going to take too long and not really appropriate at this stage. But do you have a suggested amendment? I mean, your issue is that, as I understand it, the town board won't receive the money direct. They will be told that they've got the money, that 2 million a year, and that they will then be able to spend it in the sense that the council will then authorise expenditure. But your point is that the Isle of Wight Council doesn't actually give the town board the money. So if you would suggest an amendment to the minutes, then the tape can be listened to see what was actually said at the meeting. It may be that the meeting discussed it in the wrong form. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I'll gladly do that. I'll also, as an abide, ask Chris Ward to forward his view on this to the committee so that they are appraised of his position on it as an adjunct to that. Thank you.
Do you have a, or do you have a suggested amendment, or shall we simply note for now that part of the first paragraph is not agreed and the tape will have to be listened to?
I think if we could insert that the summary was given of Chris Ward's presentation on the financial controls relating to the Ride Town Board, that would be sufficient.
Okay. I think, Melanie, you've got a note of that, and we can look into that. Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Do you have any other amendments?
I don't, although I cannot turn my microphone down.
Councillor Brodie.
Chair, I'm a little puzzled, really. We have a set of minutes put before us by professional officers from the last meeting, which I wasn't at, but I'm still going to speak because I have input as a member of the committee. And this is not the first time over the last 3 and a bit years that challenges to minutes have been brought in from this party. I think it's unfortunate that that has happened, to be frank, and I would like the opportunity to formally move the minutes as presented to this committee, and I seek a seconder. Thank you, Chair.
So, Councillor Brodie, I sort of agree with you. So I was there at the meeting, so I do think we need, and I wasn't there, I wasn't chairing that meeting, I was pre-committee, so I can't really speak on it, hence why I asked for Councillor Spink to do this. I think we do need to make sure that this part of the agenda is for the accuracy of the minutes, but also to note that officers' role is not to take this down verbatim, and that in future, if there is an issue with the minutes, then that can actually be taken as separate. This section is to actually say what is the accuracy of the minutes. So is there a spelling mistake? Does it get the onus of what was being said at that part of the meeting? So where I wasn't there, I did have to indulge and to listen to it, but in future we will be asking on the accuracy of the minutes. If there is an item from the minutes that actually feels it's further discussion, then that will be asked, something that will go with the work plan, and if it's agreed by the committee that it's worth further discussion, then that's what it will go onto the work plan, to make sure that all that doesn't take up this part of the agenda, to ensure that it's spoken at in the future.
The thing is, Chair, I don't think it's worthy of any further consideration, which is why I'm formally moving, and it has been seconded, that the minutes are agreed by the Corporate Scrutiny Committee as presented.
Thank you. I'm happy that, and at the end of this meeting, what I will do is make sure that the member in question gets a chance to reiterate their question. If it's felt by this committee that it is worthy of further discussion as per a vote on that, then we will agree, because it's the joys of corporate scrutiny that everybody can have their input, but it is for this committee to decide if it is worth further discussion. But I completely agree with you, and we'll move for the minutes as read and written to be agreed as it's been seconded. That's okay.
One point, and that's this. I agree with Councillor Brodie in large part, but sometimes what happens is that the minutes are then used to prevent a certain point being taken or issue being raised. Now, for example, I wanted to raise an issue in the course of the meeting that we have not been provided with when the item in relation to Kingston Marine Park comes up. We've not been provided with a update in the terms that was agreed at the last meeting.
Okay.
And the minutes do not actually reflect what was said. It was said by the chief executive that it would be appropriate to provide it. And the minutes don't say that. So I don't mind if the minutes don't say that, provided someone doesn't say, once I agree the minutes, you can't raise it now.
No, and I wouldn't do that, Councillor Spink, but when we get to the point on Kingston Marina, then that would be the appropriate point for that to be raised, and we ensure that it is raised at that point. Or we'll go on for the rest of the evening discussing the technicalities, and I'm a woman and I have not that much patience, so we'll move on to the next part of the agenda, and when we get to Kingston Marina, that's when we'll raise it, if that's okay. The minutes have been agreed and we'll move on. No. I have to tell you, Councillor Fuller, I'm really sorry, but you have missed it because they have been agreed. That's fine. Okay. We will do that small amendment. Can we please move on to the
Chair,
next item?
Just one point, if I may, on this. I would like the current minutes of this meeting to reflect the point that, in summary anyway, that Councillor Jarman has raised with as to the accuracy, and also the point that I've raised, because it has happened to me before in this council that it's then said to me, you can't raise this, Councillor Spink, because you agreed the minutes last time. So I wanted on the minutes my point, and I'm sure that Councillor Jarman would like his as well. So I think that's fair, and we won't delay the committee any longer.
Okay, as long as we don't delay the committee any longer, then we will make sure that that is noted and reflected in the next meetings. No, the minutes have been agreed. There's one small technical error that takes a councillor off. I don't think it's worth spending any more time delaying this meeting to decide if it's Councillor Holbrook or not. We'll just have that amendment made and go for as the minutes have been agreed. Declarations of interest, point 3. No declarations of interest. We shall move on to public question time. For a maximum of 15 minutes. We have no written questions. So is there anybody in the public gallery who has a question? No, we will. Point 5, general exception decisions, urgent decisions. There are none to discuss this evening, and we will move on to the progress update, which is pages 9. As you will note, progress on actions and outcomes when it comes to discussion about the leisure centres, that is now on the agenda today. And I do have some input into that as well. So we will wait until Councillor Jones-Evans comes through as the Cabinet member so we can question her. Is everybody happy that we move on from progress update? Councillor Jarman.
Thank you again, Chair. I do have an item related to the progress and actions outcome for the 12th of February 2024, which is on page 9. It was noted on there that the issue of the release of the email, which Councillor Jordan made in relation to the budget process, had been discharged. That is not the case. We are still waiting for a copy of that email, I'm aware that my FOI has not been responded to. I followed it up a number of times, and I believe Councillor Spink
Okay.
is still waiting
So,
for a discharge of his FOI as well, and that's been elevated.
so we will just note on the progress report for the next meeting that that hasn't actually been completed yet, not with a satisfactory answer. Is that
Thank you.
acceptable? Well, if we move on the forward plan, then we can actually have time to.
It's Chair. Thank you for your. I just wondered if Councillor Johns is a member of this committee. I'm utterly confused about some of the questions that are being asked here, as though it was a member of the committee asking the question. It's rather strange sat here watching
Yeah,
it.
so I've had this for years with corporate scrutiny, especially when I was a cabinet member, and always asked, especially when people were asking some prying questions, and I was like, well, they're not on the committee. I'm allowing the question at the moment from the member. If it gets to the point that I feel that it's overtaking from the rest of the committee, then I will not allow it. So I'm marking time at the moment, Councillor Jordan, as on yourself as well.
Question on item 6. Would it not be useful, since he's sat here, to ask the Leader of the Council to give an explanation as to why this email hasn't been released?
No, I think what we'll do is we'll move it actually on the forward plan instead, because we've got a really heavy agenda this evening with really important items on it. So I will stick to what I originally said, that we'll reopen that as on the progress, that it hasn't actually been satisfactory. I haven't had a look yet as chair to see if it has been satisfied or not. So I'm not prepared to open this as a debate until I am clear that it actually hasn't been satisfied, hence why it will go back as open, and then I'll bring it to the next meeting, and if I feel that it's been satisfied, we will actually put that item is closed. But I don't think this evening is time for the debate when we've got such a heavy agenda anyway. Okay.
If I could just remark, that's September, that's 2 months away.
What I will do is, if I'm happy that it's been satisfied, I will make sure that I email all the committee to say that I have seen in the information. So having looked through has anybody got anything at the moment that they would like to discuss on the forward plan or the committee's work plan, or are they happy to just note the contents? Yeah. So the committee work plan, I'm just trying to get through these bits because we do have such a heavy agenda at the moment. So everybody's happy with that? Thank you. Thank you. So we now have a standing item, going back to how I always used to be when I was in cabinet, and everything that went to cabinet always had the chance and the opportunity to come to scrutiny, which I think it's right and it's fair, and scrutiny should be acting as that critical friend and actually being able to look in a public place what is going on 2 days after that at cabinet. So if you should all have in front of you the agenda for cabinet, we don't need to run through absolutely everything. We don't need to go through chairman's announcements, etc. But we will go to item 5 on the cabinet agenda. I'm sure you've all read with great interest the report on school place planning. I could talk about school place planning for a long time, but I need to remember that I'm the chair of scrutiny. It's not my place to do so. Just to introduce and to open up that report. Remember, you are talking on to the report and the point that we are on now. So I will open it to the committee, but before I open it up to the committee, I would like to introduce somebody who I've listened to over many years talking about place planning, who I know feels very strongly about it. And being a chair of governors, I respect his opinion. So I have said he has 3 minutes, and I'm sure he's been timed to actually give the governor's view on this report. It's my meeting, so I can invite who I like. That's what usually happens in health committees. So thank you, Simon Richards, and then we will open it to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdale, for the invitation to speak this evening. Just for a bit of quick context, I've been a school governor for 13 years, mainly on the island. I've worked nationally on governance with the National Governance Association. I'm currently a governor at Haylands Primary School, and until recently was the chair and vice chair of Schools Forum, and perhaps most pertinently, am author of the governance submission in Appendix 3 to the Cabinet report that we're looking at. So just a quick comment on the report then. It presents what I believe is a compelling business case for change and is supported by governors, and I also believe it is supported by head teachers. It is something that the group of governors and head teachers that have been discussing this over the last few years actively have been seeking, and we're very welcome to see it moving forward. It is perhaps sad to say that the impact of the surplus places has got worse since that submission to Education Scrutiny 2 years ago, and certainly there's nothing that has happened since to suggest that those projections were inaccurate in any way. I think the issues to consider with this paper are these. There's some mention in the strategy, the place planning strategy, about work to consider whether pupils at each school live in the local community or travel in, and that is really critical to understanding the demand profile for primary school places. And I remind members of what happened with the merger of Yarmouth and All Saints primary schools out in the West White, and the fact that there were so few children attending Yarmouth Primary School that actually lived in Yarmouth, and that move was actually in the best interest of children. We need to consider the school building capacity. We don't want, what governors and head teachers don't want to see is lots of half-empty schools, and there are several schools that have reduced their PAN to try and manage this issue over the last few years, and we already have several half-empty school buildings. Small schools don't automatically mean smaller classes, and that is suggested partly in the paper. I would say that the funding model supports 30 as an optimum class size. Smaller schools have fewer classes. They don't generally have smaller classes, although that has tended to be the pattern over the last few years, again, because pupil numbers have been in decline. I would also highlight that the problem is here and now. There's a lot of mention of birth rate, which perhaps would suggest that the problem is in the future. There are 1,900 empty school places on the in primary schools on the island at the moment. That is equivalent to 9 one-form entry schools, and by September 27, if nothing changes, that will go up to 14 one-form entry primary schools that we don't need. And again, I'd also highlight the need for an island plan, not something that looks at the 8 smaller planning areas. Those really don't mean anything to parents, and they don't live by them. I just want to quickly mention school budgets using data from Schools Forum last week. 76% of primary schools have set a deficit budget for the current financial year. 23% of primary schools will be in overall deficit by March next year, and the total debt of those schools is over £1 million now. A further 35% of primary schools will have balances by March next year at less than £50,000, and that puts them at serious risk of falling into deficit the following year, which would mean that more than half the primary schools would be in deficit. And I'll finish just by saying this. Primary school closures are unfortunately inevitable. Does the council want to manage that process, minimise the cost to the council, ensure that we have the right size schools in the right places to meet current and future demand, or the council prefer to wait to see which schools spiral further and further into deficit and debt and then end up closing at a massive cost to council reserves and to the detriment of pupil education? Thank you.
Thank you. Before we bring the rest of the committee in, we do have an agenda setting discussion across all the chairs of scrutiny. So what I wanted to do is make it really clear that there will be a separate scrutiny meeting after Cabinet, hence why it was really important that we do have a discussion here, because actually Cabinet might listen if we come out at some point, if we have something that's on a paper and we think, well, actually this is a valid point, then it can be taken on board. But what we're also doing as well is I'm getting the feelings from the chairs of other committees when we do have a Cabinet set agenda, and so they can give their point as well. So I do have, when there's an item that involves health scrutiny, I've got something to read out from Councillor Redrup. You do have a copy that's gone round. And on this item, I do have some comments from Councillor Brading, who this will go to his committee, but after Cabinet. His comments are as follows. This is his views as chair of Children's Services Scrutiny Committee on School Place Planning Report and on the Isle of Wight Education Strategy. He welcomes the long overdue report on school place planning, but does have some initial concerns. There seems to be an excessive amount of unnecessary information and a small amount of waffle, no consideration or allowance for the increased cost of transport associated with any school closures. There is no part of the strategy that seems to try and address the increasing and very high percentage of elective home education pupils. This should be part of the solution. Plans does not seem to look ahead far enough, and that the future pupil numbers may rise and we need school capacity to deal with this. He does have serious concerns about the Isle of Wight Council's staffing capacity to deal with such a very complex and onerous task of school closures if they try to do too many at once. There also seems to be a few areas in the figures and information presented. As one example is the school and Shanklin Place planning area. The proposed cuts are based upon certain stated factors, but on page 31 of 39, the significant housing developments for this area are wrong, with 100+ housing developments at each of the housings at each of the old Broadley and Berry Hill site and the old Sandon Middle School sites, both being missed off, which distorts the figures and conclusions. These two sites will have an impact of educational requirements in the Bay Area. The production of the new Isle of Wight education strategy is well overdue. In previous councils, we had a delivering education excellent 4-year strategy that ended in May 2021. Since then, there is no strategy, and we're not sure why that's not been produced yet. The result of this is that we are now having to do some radical and drastic in place planning proposals to avoid schools failing even more financially than they are currently. That said, the strategy presented feels sound and well written, but they do have some concerns about the staffing capacity and support to deliver every aspect as quickly as the island needs. Can we remember this will be taken into a further discussion after Cabinet, so I open it to the committee. Councillor Brode.
Just quickly, can that be circulated to every member of the committee? I see some people have got it. I haven't got it.
I did ask.
Feeling excluded.
Oh, you can't be excluded. We won't allow that. We hand that down. I was going to get it circulated, but it came late in the day. So I'll make sure next time when we have these reports, they're emailed out at least a day before. It was only because we had the meeting recently to decide that was going to be, Councillor Stewart was part of that meeting, and we've said if there's anything that comes to this main corporate scrutiny that's on other people's agendas, if there was something that involved housing and regen, then Councillor Stewart would actually read out something as well to show that it would be looked at in further detail at his committee. It's just really important that we do have a say before this goes to Cabinet. I completely concur, and me neither. But because it was presented, it's in the easiest way to read it out at this committee. But in future, it will be sent out a while beforehand. It's just the way that we're doing it now is to make sure that those chairs of those respected committees had some input into this meeting as well, to show that it wasn't just on the agenda for here, that it would be on other people's agendas, and those chairs would give it further detail. Does anybody on this committee have further input into school place planning? Because this is going to Cabinet on Thursday.
Comment on that, Claire. Thank you. I do agree with a few of Councillor Brading's comments there, especially the increased travel costs. I'd really like to have a better understanding of what the implications of that would be if we're going to close some places and produce extra buses, extra travelling and less walking to school, etc. Thank you.
Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to wonder if there's any statistics as to how many pupils are home educated.
So we have a Cabinet member here. Shall I take the other questions or would you like to answer that now, Councillor Bacon?
In terms of a specific figure, it changes daily. I'd probably turn behind me. I'm aware of roughly what the figure is, but there are a couple of things I would like to say, but more as an overview. But for a specific piece of information like that, perhaps Mr. Whitaker could be a better place to help.
So we'll leave to the end then, so you can answer all the questions in one if there's not too many. Is that okay? Have you made a note of that question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Yeah, just to see if we got any statistics on how many pupils are being home educated. Thank you.
Has anybody else from the committee got any questions on this item? So before we hand over to the director and to the cabinet member to answer. Councillor Stewart. At that I was expecting Councillor Brodie.
Yeah, I've had a discussion with Councillor Lilly about this. I think that on the whole, we approve of this particular strategy, and we are pleased to see that it is based around island needs and considerations. And we had many concerns about the approaches of Hampshire authorities. Specifically, we were pleased to see that there is a coherent set of criteria being set up. There is some improvement needed. We agreed to consider homeschooled and travel, but I think that's does seem to be coming up several times already, so I won't say any more.
Thank you. I'll pass over to the officer, to Mr. Kerr, and then to the cabinet member to sum up. Then more questions from Councillor Brodie, remember.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr. Richards for coming in this evening to share his views on behalf of governors on the island, and also for the work that he does with colleagues every day to support education outcomes for children and young people on the island. It's much appreciated. If I can just address some of the points that Mr. Richards raised. It's great to see so much engagement and thought that has gone into the paper. This is a very significant area for the island to make decisions on, because it is fundamental to improving education outcomes for children and young people on the island. I hope that members have had the opportunity to see the draft education strategy, which will see us through to 2030, which was published last Monday. Is a draft. And we welcome all feedback on that, and it'll be open for feedback throughout the autumn before it's finalised towards the end of this calendar year or early in 2025. But it's really important to see this school place planning strategy as a core building block of that strategy to improve education outcomes for all children and young people on the island. As Mr. Richards so articulately explained, the head teachers and governing bodies are very broadly in agreement with the need to act in quite a significant way to make sure that we align the number of primary school places we have on the island to the size of the population, which has changed very, very significantly and is certain to change more over the coming years. And we know that because it's based on actual birth data, not forecast birth data, but actual birth data, those children who have been born but has not yet started school. So that means that we have a lot of certainty about how many children are going to be entering the school system in the years to come. And as Mr. Richards said, if you wind back a year or 2 years, the forecast then, which were also based on actual birth data, proved to be accurate. Absolutely agree with the point about being clear about whether children are living close to a school or whether their parents are choosing to travel quite significant distance to that school. Because of course, the element of parent choice is very significant, and we need to bear that in mind in everything that we do. School building capacity as well. I think this is a really important point because we do have a significant primary school estate. And if we have empty spaces in it, what that does is it brings additional cost to those schools, which means that schools have less money left over to invest in education resources. What those spaces also, though, offer the opportunity is to expand elements of education that we currently don't have enough of on the island. And many of you will be aware about the increase in the numbers of children and young people who have special educational needs and disabilities. And indeed, in many cases, the severity of the needs that those children have. And so some of these empty buildings will give us the opportunity to create new provision so that those children can be supported with their education needs on the island. as opposed to needing to travel either daily or on a residential basis to school on the mainland. Also absolutely agree with Mr. Richards' third point about small schools not meaning small schools not meaning anything other really than one form entry schools. We have some examples of really successful one form entry schools, but the point that I think we're hearing is that if you have less than 30 in a class, the way that school finances work, it's very difficult to access the resources that the governing bodies and school leaders need to produce the very best school outcomes. The other points around this is a problem here and now. It is, and because of the birth data, we know that it is going to become more significant. Really welcome the point about this being a whole island approach. We've had some feedback about, well, we've done some reviews on capacity quite recently, but I don't think we've had recently on the island a whole island approach. And I think two things on that. First of all, the world is changing all the time in terms of the needs of our children, and the point about families choosing to travel from one area to another. But we haven't in the past had a whole island strategy, and I think that's one of the big differences that we've got this time. And we then had a good detailed explanation of the financial challenge. I'd reiterate, this is primarily about driving up education outcomes for children. You'll be aware that if we benchmark outcomes on the island, on average, there are some fantastic achievements on the island. So some children, some groups of children do fantastically well. And in fact, some schools do perform above the national benchmark, both at, well, for example, at GCSE level. However, it is true that on average, the outcomes that children achieve are significantly below the national average. And that is what we want to tackle. And though, in addition to education outcomes, it is about the financial situation of schools, which, so we're absolutely clear, when a school closes, if that school has debt, that debt is inherited onto the council's balance sheet. And so if this situation continues, those debts, which at some point the council will inherit, are going to get larger. In terms of the other points that were raised by members, travel costs. So the point about travel costs is that until we know which schools are in scope, it's very hard, in fact, impossible to model those transport costs. That will be in the next stage of the process. And so when the plan is that in September, that the names of schools proposed for expansion, amendment or closure are named, we will at that stage be able to include the modelling around what the transport implications are of those proposals. In terms of electively home educated children, we have about 645 children at the moment who are electively home educated. To put that in perspective, that is about 3.5% of our child population. That compares with a national average of children who are electively home educated of about 1.1%. So we have a very significant above England average numbers of children who are being electively home educated. Since I've been involved in the education system on the island since February, one of the things that I've learned is that looking at that group of electively home educated children and families, and it is a parental choice to pursue that route, that I think it's not necessarily helpful to look at it as a homogenous group. Because if you talk to families about why they've chosen that route, they will share a number of reasons. So there are some families who philosophically have chosen that as their number one option. There are also other families who have chosen it, not because it's their number one option, but because the experiences that their children have had in school have not been good enough. And as a result of that, they have removed their children from a mainstream or special school education and decided to electively home educate them. So electively home educated cohort, it is part of this education strategy, and therefore, and it is considered within this. But fundamental to that is understanding that the different reasons that families choose to pursue it. And my aspiration is that over the coming years, as we drive up the quality of education on the island, that some of those families will actually say that electively home educating option is not my first choice. And now actually, as the schools have improved, I'm happy for my child to go back and pursue an education via that route. However, there will always be that group within that cohort of about 640 who that's what they want to do, and that's the parent choice that they have. The final point, I guess, was around the overall approval that we heard from Councillor Stewart, and we welcome that, and thank you for your kind words. Thank you.
Councillor Bacon, would you like to have a small say on the paper, please?
I only need small say. No, I think just about everything's been said there. Thank you very much, Ashley. I would just like to mention a few points, though, but I think that what you've just heard is a really good review of the situation. Just on the side issue of home education, I just would like to underline, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It does happen. Obviously, there's a national discussion about that now. We've heard some potential proposals coming forward from the new government. It is worth remembering that on the island we have an extensive support network amongst the EHE students and parents. And the issues here are often very different to other areas where that is lacking. Thank you very much to Mr. Richards for his address. I think there wasn't anything I demur from in that. We have spoken, not too recently, but I know that he's had a lot of input into the process, and we certainly did have some very interesting and productive discussions when I first took on this role, and I thank him for his continued active interest. It is good to know that the governors, as a body, are supporting what is being done. I think Mr. Whitaker has made it clear that there's no definitive or exhaustive list of considerations in this process. Everything is to be considered, and also the fact that this is not a process based on those planning areas. They are set out in the documentation. They are a way of compiling and presenting information, but this is a whole island process. The whole island is being considered, and is not, any outcomes are not going to be driven by those essentially artificial areas. One thing, the particular reason I did want to say something is that in listening to other councillors around the room, I was a little saddened because the one thing that wasn't mentioned was educational standards.
Councillor Brodie hasn't spoken yet. He's saving his.
Well, I've given it away now, haven't I? But in the questions that and points that were being put, no one mentioned standards, and I think that has been lacking in the debate. As Mr. Whitaker said, what we are doing is looking at place planning is part, a kingpin perhaps, but a part of an overall island education strategy, the drive of which and why all this is being done is to increase standards. We are not good on the island. We feature at the bottom of tables. We shouldn't. We can do better. We have some amazing examples of performance and achievement. We should have more. We should have them across the board. So the whole purpose for doing this is to improve our standards. If we get the school estate right, schools are not worrying about day-to-day survival, but their attention turns to what they're actually achieving in the classroom and the outcomes they're achieving. It is good that all members and public, parents and so on are engaging in this process. A lot of engagement has taken place already. The plans that we had for a further formal consultation were scuppered a little by an election we've just had, but we are still going forward with such engagement as we can do before formal proposals are published in September. So I would encourage all in this room who have views to contact the education staff, give those views, give that information, and please encourage all those in your wards who are concerned, whether they be parents or others, about the education system, to engage and provide information. The more information, the views we have, the better the decision making that will result. I think I'd be repeating myself, let alone Mr. Whitaker, if I said more, but I'd just like to emphasise that this is, place planning is a process that is now part of an overall education strategy, and the key driver for everything we are doing is standards to make the outcomes better and to create better futures for our children. Thank you.
Councillor Brody, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Chair. Regarding educational standards, I couldn't agree more, Councillor Bacon. It's absolutely imperative that we start to address standards that haven't improved since school reorganisation back in, what was it, 2011? I've probably got the, sorry, when?
Started in 2007.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, yes, 2007. I think the middle school where I was the chair of governors closed in 2011. There's a reference in the report to educational standards having improved since then. I don't think that applies at all. And I would suggest that you would probably want to remove that from the report. I can't find the actual reference in there. But to say that educational standards have improved since the middle schools closed on the island, I think is actually false. Standards have been very poor since then. I know that you yourself, I know that Councillor Jordan behind you, and possibly Councillor Fuller, all oppose the end of middle schools along with myself. And I've never been convinced that that was the best thing to happen. And I don't think you should be bigging it up in this report. The driver for this, of course, apart from the educational standards, is about finance. Schools are really struggling all the time, and that is a main driver for it, as well as the educational standards. And we know why that's happening. There's a few issues I've picked up on. I'll limit to what I say today. There the primary planning areas, and I'm pleased that you say the process will not be based on them, because it's always puzzled me why St Helens is classed as Ryde Rural, and Bembridge, which is 2 miles away, is in the Bay area. It's always seemed very odd to me, and I hope that's nothing to do with you being the local councillor. But you know, why would I suggest that in the first place? Obviously, you've got Arreton. It bizarrely, you know, is within the Newport area, and I think that is probably going to be to their disadvantage. So I'm pleased that you're not going to be basing the whole process on those areas, because I think they're entirely false. In terms of house building approvals, etc., there are errors there. Firstly, I mean, I can always say anything in my ward. It says that on the 1st of April 2024, there were still 64 houses to be built at Pan Meadows. No, there's not. Everything was built by the 31st of March. There are no houses there. You need to get correct information. Similarly, Medina Yard, which I think is in the Cows Medina ward, which was approved some about 4 or 5 years ago with 535. Everything I hear says that that will never happen. And yet you've got that within the report as a housing development. And of course, we never know whether the Westridge application would be built in Ryde. You know, that went to the county court recently, and we'll have an outcome sometime, but we don't know that in terms of Ryde. Finally, can you just clarify for everybody here the time frame for this? You've referred to the fact we've had some consultation. It's not exactly set the world alight, I have to say, in terms of your report, which you're presenting to Cabinet this week, and then you're going to present formal proposals in September. What happens after that? Thank you.
Go on then.
Shall we have the cabinet member first, because it's cabinet paper?
Well, I'll set out the basic information, but I suspect Mr. Whitaker could give a little bit more detail. Thank you for underlining my comments about the planning areas, Councillor Brodie. It was a very early discussion that identified that they were not going to help in this process. And also thank you for the updates of information. As I said before, information is valuable. So if there are things that need to be updated, things change day by day sometimes, then please feed that in. The quality of the information, as I said earlier, feeds into the quality of the decision making. In terms of the timetable, I can give you the very basic outline, and then Mr. Whitaker may wish to fill in some of the details. We will be discussing the proposals, by which I mean the naming of schools, at September Cabinet. I'm afraid I can't recall the date off the top of my head. There will then be the formal consultation process that statute requires following on from that decision, and decisions ratifying or whatever about those proposals will be made at a December cabinet. There's now a December cabinet to do that. That will then lead to schools that are identified in December for closure. Those closures will take effect from the autumn term of 2025. There was other steps along the way, but that's the essential timetable.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I guess looking beyond this place plan, my overriding frustration is that the various pressures we face are exacerbated by a funding model that inherently disadvantages places like the Isle of Wight, given our demographics. I appreciate we're highlighting the pressures to the Association of Directors of Children's Services, and apologies if these are unfair questions, Mr. Whittaker, but do we feel we're being heard? Does the association have an agreed view on how we alleviate those pressures, and are they actively raising through government? And lastly, are there any signs that the recent change of government would bring about funding changes that may alleviate some of those pressures? Sorry, or a few in there.
Thank you. Shall I just add a bit of detail to what Councillor Bacon said? So in terms of the timeline, we've got Cabinet on Thursday. We've then got a children's scrutiny meeting next week, which has a single item meeting to talk about this. Then the papers will be published for September Cabinet on the 4th of September, and the Cabinet meeting is on the 12th of September. We are very, very conscious of the levels of very understandable anxiety within schools around this. So the timetable includes a very detailed plan for supporting schools through this process and speaking with school leaders. So they will all be spoken to, and they've agreed the timetable prior to the Cabinet paper being published on the 4th of September. So we've listened to feedback about how process has been run in the past. And it's very, very important that we are supportive of schools through this process, which is going to be difficult. So Cabinet on the 12th of September, which is where schools will be named for proposed expansion, amendment or closure. And I say that because imagine if you're in year 3 and your school is named for closure, you need to go somewhere for the rest of your primary school career. So in the next few years, there will be a time where children actually move to a different school, which may actually expand in the short term. This is a very, very complicated process, including the transport considerations, etc. There will then be another bespoke policy children's scrutiny meeting on the 17th of October, which will be a single item meeting to talk about this. And then there will be the final Cabinet meeting on the 12th of December, when Cabinet will consider the views of the consultation that will run between about the 20th of September for about a 6 or 7 week period on that September Cabinet paper. So after the schools have been named, there will then be a formal consultation on those proposals. So everyone will have an opportunity to feed into that. And then Cabinet will then make their final decision on the 12th of December. If I may just comment on a couple of other things that have been brought up, and also links partly to what Councillor Brading said in his email, and just the point about planning applications. So school place planning is not an exact science, because some of the things that are being picked up here about houses developed not being included. So there's a distinction between those housing developments which have received planning approval and those that haven't. So there's a decision about, do you put in planning proposals that haven't received planning or those that do? There's also the consideration of how many children will result as arriving in the school system as a result of those units being built. And of course, that depends on how big the units are, where they are, who's going to buy them, etc. So there's always going to be a degree of subjectivity to the calculations around this. And much as I would love it to be an exact science, it will never be an exact science because of that uncertainty. Councillor Brading also raised the point about the capacity in the Children's Services Directorate to deliver on some of these changes. It's an enormous piece of work, and in the finance section of the paper, you'll see recognition of that and the request for some additional funding to support these proposals. In terms of Councillor Lever's question about the school funding model, I think that it's unlikely that the school funding model is going to change significantly away from a per child basis. That's fundamentally what it's based on. So you come up with an amount of money. There are differences to this, and our Vice Chair of Schools Forum could talk at length about this, I'm sure, but fundamentally it's about there's an amount of money that's received per child. I think it's unlikely that that will change in the short term, certainly. But it's also true that as an island, we will continue to build relationships with new ministers and make the case that we do have a unique set of circumstances on the island. And in many respects, it is more expensive for us to deliver services, including some education provision where teachers, for example, are travelling across from the mainland to teach our children. In terms of the relationship with the new government, I think it's too early to say about any changes they will make or changes in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for their time. I do think it's really important when a really big issue like this comes to Cabinet that we do have a chance at scrutiny to discuss it beforehand. And sometimes it makes it easier for that process through Cabinet because you've heard the feelings of it here today. It's corporate scrutiny. I know this will be discussed in far more detail at Children's Services Committee. And I'm sorry that we took up so much part of this agenda on it, but it is really a subject to everybody who lives in the island, who is a parent, grandparent, or intending to be a parent in the future. You know, it affects all of us, doesn't it? And the standards. Councillor Bacon is desperately important because I am going to move on.
I think just in light of what you said just then, something Councillor Lever said, just one thing to mention is that it's actually a national problem, birth rate. The birth rate is going down across the country. We are not alone in having to face this issue. Of course, a major chance to increase the birth rate was lost on Sunday night when lost the football, but we shouldn't think that we're out on a limb on this.
No. And I think most of us who follow things understand. I'm going to close this subject here now because I think we have given it a really good discussion on it before it goes to Cabinet on Thursday. I'm just going to quickly run through the stuff on the Cabinet agenda because we do have lots of other stuff we need to discuss this evening, and I'm aware how much time we've taken, but I do think it was a really important subject. Does many of the committees have anything to discuss on the Better Care Fund that is going to Cabinet? No. Thank you, Simon. Does anybody have anything to discuss on the A3056 speed limits review? I would just like to make one point on that before this goes to Cabinet. I have to say that officers and people from Island Road who have actually been part of the speed review, and we know part of this goes through my ward. They have been really thorough and coming out to town and parish councils and discussing with them and making very clear what the proposals are. I was at parish council where everybody was having a good look at the maps and the things. So thank you to Island Road for taking the time to make sure that they did come out in the evenings and come to those parish councils and discuss it. It would be nice if it was a speed review across the whole island, but it is a very specific area. Does anybody have any other point on point 7 of the Cabinet paper, the speed review, before we move on to the main agenda? No, we're happy. And as per the committee, hold on, we do have a member's question. Councillor Blake.
Just on that, is there a plan to have a island-wide speed review or at least somewhere we can input possibles?
So the question is, and I think that would be to Councillor Jordan, is there a date when we will have a final date for a full island speed review? All the data coming out?
Can you hear that? Is that on? Not sure this is working. If it isn't, it's working. we don't have a final date, but the autumn of this year. There have been some issues with staffing, staff leaving, and us being able to recruit to the roles that are required to bring the report forward to Cabinet.
So Councillor Jordan, is your autumn my autumn? Because if it's raining, it's autumn to me. What date do you call autumn?
Autumn in the sense that sometime between September, October and November, Chair.
Okay.
This 2024.
2024, this autumn. We will be holding, we've made a note, it will be minuted, it will be accurately minuted. And what we will do is make sure that we're questioning you again in the autumn, October onwards, to get a date and actually see the plan. September onwards to see the plan would be fantastic. Thank you. We will now move on to the main agenda. So the next part of the agenda is number 9, Cross-Solent ferry operators. I do need to make it really clear that we need to be aware of our remit, that we are councillors, that we can have a discussion on this, but we need to make clear of how much input we can have and what change that we can actually change to Cross-Solent travel. So I'll open the discussion, but if we start to go off on changing the world and who should run it and how we're going to finance it, that really isn't a remit of this council or anything that is within our gift to do. So I assume everybody has read the brief on pages 27 to 36, and I hand it over to Councillor Critchison.
My question, yes, I did read the document, and what came out of it for me was from the Islands Forum. I thought that was quite interesting that we can gather data from those other areas that have things in common, being that they've got a amount of water between them, and that we could get some data, because obviously it said that the Isles of Scilly was the only other one that had it run by a kind of third party and not council involved in it. And so it would be good to know about their figures, and also what do the other islands do that we don't, as to they get the funding, and make that quite clear to public why that we're not getting it, and why we've got a business running it instead of having those subsidies that they do get, and why, because I could like to understand that more. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a statement. As I said, we're going to get different chairs, different committees coming forward. There is a statement that was made by Councillor Redrup regarding health travel. As we know, health travel is a really huge thing that has sat on Health Scrutiny's agenda for as long as I can possibly imagine. I will make sure these are circulated by email so he doesn't feel left out. That's going to Councillor Brodie, and noted that I don't need to read it out because it doesn't hold in people's heads that we have, but we have got the opinion of Health Scrutiny as well. It would be really interesting if I could just bring in the Chief Exec on travel, if that's okay, because I know you've been as long as I've been involved in travel, you have as well. I think yesterday sort of highlighted how difficult things can be, and how quickly that we can become a bit like stuck on the island, because I made the mistake of being on the mainland yesterday and had to miss a meeting yesterday evening because it was practically impossible to come back. One point that I will make, and I know it's not within our remit to request for this done, but I do need to make sure that it is noted, hopefully by this committee, that in events like yesterday and a ferry operator cannot operate, it does not give the other ferry operator the right at that point to put their prices up to a level that they had not been the day before. I did travel with one of the ferry operators yesterday, and I have to say their staff were absolutely amazing. But being really nosy, I did go and check what my ticket would have cost if I then booked it when they knew that they were the only operator in place, and it had gone up by £200 for the same journey yesterday. And I think that's the sort of thing that we need to be aware of and put forward to ferry operators, that we understand that they need to make a reasonable level of money to attain the service, but sometimes it does feel that we're monopolising on situations. I'll hand over to the Chief Exec.
Thank you, Chair. And I think probably two key points from me, really. One is that you've rightly outlined that as a council, the way in which we can intervene in this situation is very limited. We are not able to, of ourselves, bring forward regulation that requires ferry operators to do something in particular. And I think that's set out in the paper that you've got in front of you. We are, however, in a different position, both with a national government and with 2 members of parliament for the island than we were before we started kind of like producing this paper for you. So I think there is an opportunity for the Isle of Wight Council, together with both MPs for the island, to collectively have a voice and a narrative to government on what could be considered and what the key issues are for the island. You've outlined that health travel is one of the issues that is a real consideration. And I think there is still more work to be done by the ICB and the providers themselves to set out how their changes in delivery models will impact on the needs of local residents in terms of access to services that may or may not be on island. So there's still some more information that we need on that, and I'm pleased to see that that sort of approach is being taken by Health Scrutiny, because I think it's long overdue. And I think the other issue is that the voice of the patient feeding directly into the ferry operators and their experience of travel is really important in this place as well. So again, I welcome the opportunity that Health Watch is given through Health Scrutiny on the work that they do. And quite rightly, it's something that we will keep monitoring through the Health and Care Partnership, because it is an issue that is affecting this community on the island. There's probably very little else that I can add to the paper, but welcome comments from the committee. And I know we've got Councillor Jordan, Cabinet Member here, and Colin Rowlands, Director, who will be able to provide detailed information.
A question for Councillor Spink. I do have a question as well.
Thank you, Chair. Really 3 related questions for clarification, really. Paragraph 17 of the report, that we together with the Isles of Scilly are the only group of islands in the forum that don't have government subsidised or operated ferry services. Do we not meet the criteria for that? And if so, what is the criteria? I suspect it's the distance offshore, is it? But why is that? So that's one question. Perhaps it's easier if I roll them all together. When I read the paper, it looked to me that the most hopeful thing was a public service obligation. What's the criteria for that, and what have we done as a council to try and get that? And then finally, point 25, the committee could support the MP if they call for a review into ferry travel, if they choose to take that course of action. So can we call upon our 2 new MPs to call for a review? So those are really 3 questions of clarification, if I may, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Remind me of the 3. The first one was, just remind me.
Yes, of course. The first one is what's the criteria? Paragraph 17, why is it that we and the Isle of Scilly are the only group of islands in the forum that do not have government subsidised or operated ferry services? And what is the criteria? Is it distance offshore or something of that nature?
You may be right. Very good question. Some of the questions that we've been asking for quite a while, Councillor Spink. In part and mostly, the other islands in the Island Forum are Scottish islands, subsidised by Scottish Government outside of the regime of British Government funding. The reason the Isles of Scilly has been mentioned is that's the other island in the UK that may or may not be appropriate to consider in terms of any funding they've had. And indeed, they were I don't know if they actually took that, Wendy, but they were offered 43 million for a replacement ferry to the Isle of Scilly some time ago. They've got a single operator. I'm not sure if that actually took place. There was some concerns over the single operator and the money going to a single operator without due process of tendering. There were some considerations around that. I think your third point, Councillor Spink, about us and our distance from the mainland is a well-made point. And many people know anecdotally that government over years have considered the Isle of Wight, the Isle being Ireland, as an estuary. And therefore not actually seen as an island. How and when or where we will get government to recognise this island as an island and deal with us in terms of our funding as well will be a question we're asking. What was the second point, Councillor Spink?
Second one is, I don't know very much about public service obligation. So could you explain what that is and whether or not, A, we've applied for it, could apply for it, and what the criteria is?
So public service obligations are much like airlines and trains and buses, where they have to meet certain service levels and in terms and in pricing, I think, in some ways. We have asked government to intervene in the past year. This is done. I think I circulated a letter. If I haven't, I'm happy to do so, but I think I have. And our response from the then government was they believed that the service to the island was efficient and sufficient, and that they had no plans to intervene in terms of placing obligations on the operators. What was the third one?
The third one was paragraph 25, that this committee could support our MPs if they call for a review. So can we urge the MPs to, our new 2 MPs, to do that?
So I
absolutely will be doing that. I'm working with other industry professionals right now. I have spoken with one of the 2 MPs about this specifically, and we are working towards an approach for another CMA, so another attempt for government to look at that. It's a duopoly, but what we would like to refer to as a monopoly, and to look at that to see whether there's room for them to intervene with perhaps a public service obligation. I've also asked the Office of Road and Rail through their board members whether they are able to intervene, but unfortunately they don't have the powers as yet to intervene. The Office of Road and Rail, ORR, who oversee the railways and buses and so on, they don't have the powers to intervene. So the answer to your question is, Councillor Spink, absolutely. One of the first things, I'll get both MPs, we will get both MPs together and see how they can further our call for some help on our ferry services. I heard just today, I think it went out in the press, that a part for our floating bridge was due to arrive but couldn't arrive yesterday because of the delays to the ferry companies. So we are mindful and anxious to resolve this.
Couldn't even make it up.
Thank you, Councillor Jordan. Thank you.
Ask on behalf of the committee, if everybody in the committee is happy with this, that that the cabinet do write as a matter of urgency. Now we have to both MPs and request that, you know, the items that we've brought forward, you know, where are we going to be, you know, are you going to work together to get us, you know, really highlighted that we issues we have. When that letter is issued, please can it be on behalf of this committee sent to all councillors so that we all get to see it. We do find lots of things go out and then not all councillors get to view it at the time, so it'd be really good so we could always all follow that progress on behalf of our residents. Does anybody else? Councillor Stewart, before we move on.
You won't be surprised if any of you have been watching the news the last few weeks that I mentioned ferries quite a lot. lot of what's been said reiterates what we've done. Can I just remind the committee that actually we all agreed as councillors unanimously back in November that there should be fair approaches to Cross-Solent services by way of regulation, service obligation and government subsidy. I know that you've been working on that, and obviously you got a little bit of a pushback from central government at the time. But it is worth mentioning that inside discussions, the now MPs, certainly on the west side, were very keen to actually to go for this. So the question is really, can you please ensure that you include other members, other councillors into this equation of talking to the MPs? And the real point from my committee point of view is that actually the blockage, the trade barrier that the Solent operators give us is affecting our economy. And you only have to look at two things. The fact that employment on the island is wages are something like 75% of what they are on immediate neighbourhood, and that the cost of a brick is virtually double. So there are very significant economic factors in the Solent services. Thank you.
So I reiterate, when you have written that letter, it would be very interesting, in the future as well, to know the actual effect, and I'm not sure which committee it might sit under, neighbourhoods and regen, wherever tourism sits, that this really does hamper tourism. When stuff was happening yesterday and the ferries weren't able to bring the people over, people were cancelling those holidays, and then the hoteliers, etc., looked like they were going to have the financial implication pushed back onto them because people couldn't get over, and they were saying, I don't know when I'm going to get over. It was chaos. So I think it would be really interesting in the future to know that that's been taken on board and what happens and what committee that will sit in to look at tourism. We talk about a lot of health, etc., as a council, but tourism, used to be the lifeblood of this island and should be, and we need to make sure as a council we can do as much as possible to support that. Thank you. Are we happy that we move on to the next item? So the next item is, you've all seen the report, Kingston Marina, pages 37 to 40. If you're okay, I will hand this over to the cabinet member to talk to us and for us to ask questions to Councillor Julie Jones-Evan.
Thank you, Councillor Mosdale. As you can see, they've got the background to the paper, helpfully written by your supporting officer for corporate scrutiny, and then the paper itself, which the eagle-eyed amongst you will realise is actually probably less in that written report than I gave you verbally last month. And also just in the preamble, I think hopefully everyone appreciates I've been here pretty much every month and given verbal updates every month. I mean, it's just that you had the written one's the first written report that you've had. So really, yeah, there's nothing much more to say that's in the paper there. Happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Councillor Spink, I believe you have a question.
I do, yes. It doesn't seem to me that we're any further forward with a report, if I may say so, than we were at the last Corporate Scrutiny Committee meeting. And it was put on the agenda for, as I understood it, the chief executive agreed that it was appropriate for a high level, as it were, timescale and an outline of any matters that remain outstanding from negotiations, that is the heads of agreement. Why hasn't that been provided?
Because they're still being finalised, and we can't bring anything to you until they're finalised. And there's sorry, Councillor Spink.
What was
do you want to go through the chair? Sorry.
What was agreed was that there would be a report outlining any matters outstanding. So heads of terms that haven't yet been agreed are matters outstanding. Why haven't we had those which haven't yet been finalised?
Don't quite follow you, because
okay, I'll read it. I'll read it to you.
I'm not quite sure what you want. What you want to hear.
Okay.
You want details of what we're talking about? Is that what you want?
The heads of terms for agreement. We've been asking now for some time to know what heads of agreement have been agreed and what heads are still outstanding. And at the last meeting of corporate scrutiny, the chief executive said it would be appropriate for a written report dealing with that to be prepared. Now, we haven't had that, and I wondered why.
I think we've given you as much as you're able to at this particular moment in time, Councillor Spink. There's things that happen almost on a daily basis. We are moving really swiftly ahead, if I can say that, to a really good conclusion. And I have offered to be a private briefing, if that's helpful, to members of corporate scrutiny. But I really hope that in the next few weeks there'll be some good news. But what I'm not going to put us in a position of is over promising and under delivering. That doesn't do anyone any good whatsoever. So apologies for being vague, but it's not because I don't want to share anything. It's not, I'm not able to. There's commercial confidentiality here as well. But all I can do is give you my assurance that it's something that's very, very important to this council and to the island, and we're putting a lot of effort into it. And as soon as we're able to share what has been agreed, when it's agreed, because it's not been agreed yet, then we can do that. So it's a timing issue, Councillor Spink. And I've been honestly as honest and open as I'm able to be.
So I think, any of us who are in business and stuff like that understand that, negotiations can be, broken down if there are too many people discussing it, and it does make it really difficult for council officers that so many things have to be played out in a public domain. And I completely understand that, the level of transparency that's required in these things. But we also understand, from Cabinet being there, got the badge, that actually when you're in the middle of negotiations, you don't want to feel that the people you were negotiating with who've never dealt with a council before thinking, why has everything been put onto a very public playing field. I think listening to Councillor Jones-Evans, that it is moving forward, but what we do need as a committee is a very definitive answer of dates and times when we will have some positive news. It would be really good if we have this noted that on the progress report and outcomes, that in a month's time that you do come back again, see our smiling faces, and actually give us a report, because then that's another month that's gone by, and hopefully you can have some positive news. If it's really positive news and it actually can come out in the public domain before then, can I ask one thing? And it drives Councillor Brodie mad and me when we read press releases about positive news and it hasn't been given to councillors first. It is really important that we have an update before actually we read it on one of the various media platforms. So the request is, at the moment, I understand that negotiations and all this this scrutiny committee understand that negotiations are ongoing, and none of us want to jeopardise that. But what we do need to know is that in a month's time that we can have some form of update. It would be good to have some dates that things will be moving forward. Maybe what the progress has been, what's going to be the next stages, because I'm sure once these negotiations have got to a point, then there will be information on what's going to happen with Kingston Marina in the future. But I think a month to get to that point, and the commitment from Councillor Evans that councillors know before we read it in the press, would be really appreciated.
I really appreciate your support, Councillor Mosdale, and I will come back in September and give you another update, and hopefully with some more good news. And just to say that, I've not shied away from this, and I've been at every scrutiny. I do support this committee. I think it's really important. I hear directly from people that are saying about all areas of council work. I do value. I've not shied away from this. Not trying to hide anything at all. Just trying to get this over line, and it will be certainly a day for celebration once we get the first production from Disney there. I'm sure.
You've got another month, otherwise you'll all be the production of Disney. 2 months. Yeah, August, we've got all of that coming. Yeah, 2 months, you've got an extra relief. But as I said, if there is good news, all councillors would like to hear it before it goes in the press. You're starring again, number 11. Is everybody happy to move on to number 11, leisure centres? Yes, Councillor Stewart.
Briefly, obviously, Kingston Marina it falls partly into our remit. I don't want it, don't worry. Quite happy to leave it with you. But can you make sure that if it is circulated to councillors, it's circulated to all councillors, and specifically, obviously, members of my committee?
Councillor Stewart, I need to reiterate, all councillors is all councillors.
That's fine then.
There's actually a button on the email, all councillors goes to all councillors. It needs to go to all councillors. There is nothing more annoying than anybody's dropped out, missed out, and then you read it in a press release. It's incredibly frustrating. And when that frustration happens, that's when it causes animosity. And hopefully we want to move forward and know that everyone's being updated at the same time. It would be really appreciated.
Totally loud and clear.
This should probably, for the future update, move to this sort of item really should be on your committee, Councillor Stewart. Thank you for noting that, and I'll see if I can move it over in the future to the correct committee. Corporate scrutiny should be looking at what Cabinet's doing in those corporate decisions. Neighbourhoods and regions should have, and health, etc. We do need to make sure the placings of stuff are in the right places within committees, hence why it's good to get committee chairs together. And we'll move on to 41 to 48, and I will bring into that the point that I wouldn't allow Councillor Jarman to make before regarding reports and the distribution of those reports. But you have a minute, Councillor Jarman.
Thank you. Sorry, you caught me out there, Chair. I was asking another question on the topic we were just on.
Coming up on the agenda, you should have been.
Yes, I was prepared to answer a question. I got interceded. I'll leave it for now. I will ask it under members' questions with the other items I've got.
What I wanted you to do was reiterate your thing that we didn't allow to be put in the minutes regarding the circulation of a report. Would be good for us to know that that's the bit that I was querying.
Yes, so the question really is about the report which I've sent this evening to the committee. I've added a short email to that afterwards. We had asked for updated reports to be circulated. They weren't done. We'd asked for the previous report to be circulated. I understood that was to come out. I waited until the very last moment, assuming that would be actioned. It wasn't. And so I've taken the liberty of doing that. I have noted on my circular to the committee this evening the confidentiality that relates to that document. So please be advised of that when you read it. It may not be something that you wish to discuss in open session because of that confidentiality.
Councillor Julie Jones-Evans, thank you. That's noted, and that we have that report to look at. Could you just speak to your brief part that's there on leisure centres and update, please?
Hopefully it's fairly comprehensive, and apologise for the delays in bringing this forward. Obviously, we are aware of that. I think what was important was that we had the most up-to-date information for you, and we're in a period of recovery. So it's important that members have the right information. And I'm not entirely sure was there sort of decisions to be made on this. It's really just an update of where we're going. I think that's what committee wanted to see. How is the recovery post-COVID when we obviously they had to close all around the country. And I think you can see at the figures, you know, as far as our income levels and our users and our one card members, we have recovered that very well. I see you've got various questions on your the pre-paper that, you know, the cover report that on top of the report that was Mr. Minns and myself prepared for you. And I was just wondering how many of you are familiar with the report that was brought out by the Local Government Association in November. It was Sport and Leisure, Promoting Health and Wellbeing Through Public Services. I think it's well worth, and I'll send the link to you, Ms. White, if that's okay. I think it might cover some of those questions that are in the cover report. Just one big headline from that is from Sport England, and every £1 spent on sport and physical activity generates almost £4 in return across health and wellbeing, strengthening communities and the national economy. I think it's really important to see what happens at a leisure facility through the lens of health, wellbeing, strengthening communities, tackling isolation, and actually then how that feeds into the economy. And there's some really great stuff in this report. So I'll send that on to you in case any of you haven't seen that. I think it's probably best if I just take questions, really. I think that it's a fairly comprehensive report.
So-
I mean, I'm a one card user myself, and Councillor Lucio's gone now. There's probably more one card users in the room, so you know what goes on in our leisure centres. You're seeing people there. You know, for instance, when I go to my aquafit, I'm probably one of the youngest people in the room. People leave their walking sticks and crutches on the side as well, and they get in the water. You just see them having that moment of joy and togetherness, and just, you know, keeping themselves fit. And it's not until you sort of go and be a user of our leisure service, you really sort of really understand what goes on there. There's a human element as well as just the facts and figures which we report in the report. I don't know if Mr. Minns would like to. Pardon? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. So thank you ever so much for the report, and I will open it to further questions. But the one thing I've always thought about leisure centres, and I think at some point there needs to be that discussion on what the future of a leisure centre looks like. So for me, I know that there are lots of gyms that compete with gyms at leisure centres, but actually a swimming pool at a leisure centre can't compete on. There are areas I feel as a council that sometimes we shouldn't be sat there and looked at from a business position and say you need to make money on this, this and this and this, because as council we are there to do a public service and to recite stuff that are good for things that do encourage health and well-being, like swimming pools and things like that. Those things that are hard to fund if they were just run by a private business. However, I personally feel that at some point we have to have that wider debate about leisure centres, because there are areas of leisure centres that do cost lots to run, but are they there for your health and well-being? So, for example, is a jacuzzi, you know, that part of a leisure centre, something that needs to be provided as a public service in these times when, you know, economically we are trying to balance the books as well? You know, is every part of the services that are provided by a leisure centre actually needed for the reasons that you are being sent to use it? So if you are sent by a GP to go to the leisure centre and help funding through some of the programmes that are done through public health, would you actually be using the swimming pool and the gym area, or would they, because advising you to use the pool, what part of that would be funded? I think when we look at reports on leisure centres, the bit that doesn't come out into the public domain at some point, it's not probably for this evening, but to have that wider discussion on what is the future of a leisure centre that is funded by a council. What should it look like, and are all the services that are provided there essential to what we should be doing for the health and well-being of our public? You know, I probably don't like the idea of saunas and everybody sitting in the same dirty water, but hey ho. But I think it's
actually not dirty water.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I'm joking. It's that whole thing of what is the future of a leisure centre? What is the purpose of the council to provide that leisure centre service, and how broad a service do we do? So that's my question: is do you feel in the future that should be a topic of conversation of the services that we're providing at leisure centres? I know I'm calling you a councillor, sorry. So Alex Minns wants to jump in and answer that question behind you. You can't see him waving madly behind you, Councillor Evans.
I think that's a point very well made. It is something that has happened already. We did the leisure needs analysis a number of years ago, which then informed the investment that we were going to have in the leisure centres. That was a number of years ago. It would probably benefit from looking at that again and see the benefit of that to see whether that's changed too much. But that isn't something that's new. So that bit of work, and it was a very extensive bit of work, was done a number of years ago.
Yeah, I think leisure centres as a business and as a public service, it's intertwined. So if you start to cut out certain things like spa pools or things that you would consider are not directly related to health and well-being, you're cutting out that commercial draw to the leisure centre, and they still have to operate effectively on a commercial basis, albeit there is a small degree of subsidy. So it's a balance between having to operate commercially, which is what we're talking about with the one card and the income that comes in, versus that public health benefit and the access and accessibility that the private sector doesn't provide. And that's the balance you've got to make when you're actually running a local authority leisure service.
And my point is that all of those services, if you paid for a one card, that was the bit that I would like to know in the future. If you paid for a one card, what would you expect from your one card? Would you expect to use the gym? Because we know there's a combination of the one card that's just for swimming and the one card that's for the gym as well. Or is that part of the card that you expect to go and use? Saunas and steam rooms are expensive to run. My point is that we can't answer that without the data to find how many people use it. Has that questionnaire been redone in the future? What do you expect from your one card? Is it that extra service that you would expect if you went to a spa? Or is it something, because there is a big difference between a spa and running all the things that you would expect at a spa service, or is it something that you would expect of your local leisure centre where we are providing a service for part of that overall health and well-being? I don't think any of us actually know the answer, and that's why I'm saying it would be good to have that answered in the future.
Councillor Moss, respond to that. Yeah, I think it is when we see things from our perspective as a council. When you're choosing to join a gym or go swimming or do classes, you have your own perspective and why you're choosing that. So it's about the combination of services. Now I have a gold card. I can do all the classes, go to the gym, go swimming when I want. It's just easy, and you go online and you book it, and it's brilliant. You know, it's fantastic. But I go, and other people might go to Choose One Leisure, because you have one-to-one service in the gym. You have highly trained people in the pool. You have highly trained class leaders, trainers. And I think it's the quality and the professionalism and the investment that we give. You've got a nice, safe space. I mean, our gyms, for instance, have been designed so that women can feel safe in them. And not all gyms are like that. There are, in the market, there are other places where you just don't even get anyone you get basically a key card pass to go in. So you've got to look at it as a commercial thing. And also, my feeling about the spa thing, we only have one jacuzzi, and that's at Sandown. And the people that I might have to talk anecdotally back to people why they would choose to go there, and they actually have a swim, do a class, they'll sit down and have a good old natter. You know, it's their socialising they're doing together. So you can't just differentiate and say that isn't well-being. It's not as simple as that. But I do agree.
I just think it should take. I think it should be in the future looked into as well as what is expected from the public for that. Councillor Spink.
I just got to read a comment, which is partly a question and also then a direct question, and that is, this report doesn't really, in my view, enable scrutiny to carry out scrutiny. For example, the deficit in 24 to 25 is going to be 298,000. Now, I fully support leisure centres, but to carry out our scrutiny, we need to know really what it is that makes that up. This is a very general report. Now, the report, as I understand it, that came before Cabinet in 2022, that report still hasn't been disclosed. We were told it would be disclosed. It hasn't been disclosed. Now, my understanding is that runs, I haven't seen it, but I have been told that I think it runs to about 40 pages, 40. Now, we need more information, and we also need, with great respect, and I'm sorry if I'm a troublemaker here, I'd like to know why that report in 2022, which went to Cabinet, has not been circulated. I received an email from an officer saying that it would be circulated once the agenda came out. Now, it hasn't been circulated, and I'd like to know why, please.
Mr. Minns, I'm just saying because I can see him waving his hands behind you, Councillor Evans. So, Mr. Minns, you're waving your hand to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to make a point of clarification, because there's some errors in the discussion. That paper was never taken to Cabinet and was taken to informal Cabinet and was a slide presentation from the consultant.
Okay, I can't comment on that, but that's not the information that I've been given. Apart from that, I can't comment. Thank you.
I've just checked the agenda. It's not on any cabinet papers for that entire year.
Okay, is it helpful if I answer Councillor Spink's other question? So have you seen the appendix? Because the appendix has got the figures there and it tells you exactly why the deficit is being forecast at that figure. And it's all down to the projected costs of utilities. If you look at the figures, you can see that we're back at the same income, same amount of one card, same amount of users. It's the costs on basically on the utilities is an issue, and obviously there's more employee costs as well. It's a journey we're on, and we're going in the right direction. And I think that's the important thing. And of course, we're brilliantly lucky and fortunate, thanks to very good application put into Sport England for £500,000 to go towards our utilities. It went across the three leisure centres we've got, and also we also got some more money, and we worked with West White and with Waterside Pool and Ride to get them some money to do some more interventions as far as carbon saving, so which directly brings the prices down. So we've still got a bit of our Salex work that's been done that should bring prices down, but as we know, day to day electricity and gas are coming down, so that figure is what we think it might be at the minute, but that can shift.
This brings me on to a question. I hope that Councillor Brody, do you want to go before me, or should I get my question before I forget it? I'm going to let you go first. I won't forget it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it's more of a comment than a question, really. I think the key thing for me is on the financial big figures that we've been provided, and of course there was a gap between 2019 and 2022. The situation apparently pre-COVID was that we were making money out of the leisure centres, and post-COVID things have improved. We're getting a lot more gold card members, etc. But we're still projected to lose nearly 300,000 this year. I am a supporter of leisure centres, of publicly provided leisure centres, but I do believe that they need to break even. Now, I know that COVID was an exceptional thing to happen, but I would hope within a couple of years that we would be breaking even on that. I don't use the gyms at the moment. I used to, but twice I ended up having a hernia operation, because I overdo it. But I know people who do use it, who much prefer to use Medina Leisure Centre than to one of the private ones, where there's nobody there to assist you. If you want to go and try and join, you're ringing a bell and you're just ignored, etc., etc., etc. The good thing, if you go to Medina, I've never been to Sandown, if you go to Medina, there are a very professional staff there who will do an induction with you, set you up a program, etc., and try to stop you overdoing it. Unfortunately, they failed with me. I think the key thing here is, as Councillor Jones-Evans said, it's for every pound you invest, you're saving £5 in terms of the health and well-being of people on the Isle of Wight. I think it was £5 you said. And I'm a great believer in that. Within the charity I work in, we lose money on some parts of what we do, but it doesn't mean that we get lots of money in because of it. I'm a great believer in that. If you invest money, if you can bring in money as well, that's something I would support. I mean, I've watched this be on the agenda for this committee for, well, it seems interminable, to be frank. So many of the items do seem interminable, to be honest. You need to toughen up the agenda, saying here, Chair. Some of them, they never seem to shift. But this one, I've been watching it and wondering, well, what are we actually achieving? And I don't think, unless you're going to propose in the next budget, as a part of your group or whatever, that you're going to close leisure centres, let's have a political discussion about it. We're not going to achieve anything here today, because I'm not going to vote for closing leisure centres. No way. And I suspect quite a lot of members of this committee aren't either. Thank you, Chair.
And don't worry, it won't be coming from my group all the time. I'm leader either, no way. But there is things that we know we do need to look at leisure centres in the future, so leisure centres not in their existence, but actually how do we help as councillors having an input to how it can be improved, that service improved, and how it can be cost effective. So I would like it taken on board that are all the parts of it, you know, what is the public feedback on it? And my question is not to Councillor Jones-Evans, my question is to the chief exec. And it's something that's come up in the public quite often recently, and it's about solar panelling on car parks. And I wondered where the leisure centres, you know, I don't want to go and swim if I go to the heights and it's cold. I go because I've got really bad arthritis, and there's nothing worse from arthritis being cold. So you want to go in the pool. Yes, I use it all the time. But you want to go to the leisure centres and make sure the pool's at a reasonable temperature. And thank you to the leisure centre, you know, either time I go to either on a regular basis, it is. But when we look at what's going on a lot on social media at the moment about putting solar panels on car parks, what is the legalities of us over the huge car parks at Medina and Sandown of putting solar panels? And can that, my understanding is it has to be fed back to the grid, but there are talks of it being used within a council's controlling a specific building. I wonder if that's something that we could find out the legalities of it in the legislation. Colin Rowland's going to answer, but I asked Wendy first and you can put your hand up. But I just think that's, you know, a way that we could go forward, because our biggest thing of running the leisure centres is our gas and electric costs. Thank you. And then Sue.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't think you've raised an issue which is something that we aren't in the process of considering, because I believe it was raised as part of the budget setting process in any case, to look at the opportunity for solar panels on car parks per se, whether they're at Medina Leisure Centre or another leisure centre. So my view is that as a council, we should be looking at what the opportunities are and how and where they may exist. There will be some legal issues around access to the grid. We know there are some issues with grid connection and connectivity on the island. Not a discussion for here at corporate scrutiny, but you know, maybe at a future date if needed. But the detail of that, I know Mr. Rowland and his team are already starting to investigate.
Want to answer that?
It was just a general comment to remind members about the Salix grant that we were successful in acquiring for the leisure centres. So we've now got heat pumps in the leisure centres, which are partly powered by solar on the roof. Unfortunately, the solar is such that we have to export quite a lot of it because we can't use it all. So solar, I think battery technology is one of the ways forward in terms of storage, but also we've got grid problems on the island, and we are talking to the grid provider, and we are looking to upgrade that. But yeah, there are lots of complications, but we are working on it.
I'm going to make a suggestion that, and I made it years ago, that you go and have a visit to Isle of Wight salads and how they grow their tomatoes. The amount that they actually use that comes off their greenhouses. I know what it's going to come in. It's absolutely phenomenal. And the two massive Rolls-Royce engines that go in there and are powered by solar is just absolutely incredible. The problem for us as an island, and it does need to be addressed, I don't know if it could be addressed by us as a council or our two MPs, is how much of the electricity we make on this island then just has to be lost because we're an island. They don't pump it back into the grid, which I think is an important issue that we do need to take on board as a council to follow up on. Councillor Downer, we love how Isle of Wight salads do things, don't we?
Yes, they were working on combined heat and power for quite a number of years, and then it became APS Pearson's took it over from Middlewich, but they're not in charge of it now. It's P3P, but I'd recommend that you have a visit there. Purely to look at the growing. I don't know if you're allowed in the glass houses now, but there's organic and conventional crops. The conventional ones are grown on botanic oil, so that's recyclable, not rock wool these days. And that's the same over on the main site. That's organic and partly conventional. Then there's the new site that is further down the road from the Fighting Cocks. And then there's Lane End, which is over the other side of the road, Mackett's and Margaret's. That's all. And they're all grown on the same methods.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
it is worth going to see, just to see if you want a good example of what happens with solar and power. You know, we've got a really good example on the island, and I think what we don't do is actually embrace what other businesses do and what we could replicate as a council. I had two hands waving. It was Mr. Minns and then Councillor Jordan, and then we'll move on to the next item if there's no further questions on this from the committee.
I was just waving. Yeah. I was thinking of
You need
pick
to
your
put
own
that
days.
picture.
Do you remember the pick your own days, Chairman, when you used to go into fields and things? I wonder if White Salads would do that. You go down and pick your own punnet of tomatoes, mixed, organic. Sounds good.
But we're just learning about leader of the council's tomato fetish, so we'll move on to Mr. Minns. Keep calling you Councillor, Mr. Minns. Thank you, and then we'll wind this item up. Thank you.
Just as a point of interest, I think we also need to be aware of some of the things that we're also doing ourselves, which I'm not sure everybody's aware of. But as a result of that, the SALEX grants that Mr. Roden's referred to, there are now hundreds of solar panels on top of the roofs at Medina and at the Heights, and they are being used now to reduce the cost of running the leisure facilities. But they're even being used, and it's only just happened, to actually start to charge some of the council's pool cars. So there are a series of pool cars now down at Medina that are being charged off of the panels that are on the roof. So I think that's a point very well made about looking at what other people are doing, but we also need to be aware of what we've already done as well.
So I'll bring that as a sum it up to my frustration that happens within this council on a regular basis, that, you know, it's good things that come to this type of committee, because actually as a council we are really rubbish at not selling the good that we do. So I'm sat here as a, you know, having been a councillor for a long time, and that's when suddenly you're sat at this committee and asking, you know, talk about leisure centres. Well, that was part of the story that you could have bigged up in this report. You know, the stuff that we've got to a point within this council that sometimes we don't big up the stuff that we do and what we're good at, and it shouldn't have to come to corporate scrutiny. You know, that's the sort of things that really good press releases are about, that make people feel more encouraged to go to the leisure centres, because actually they are becoming more environmentally friendly. So I think, you know, if we do put anything out about this leisure centre report that's not coming back again for a long time, is actually we do stuff within the leisure centres, but we do need to take on board the future of is every service part of it, and how, and the good that is being done, and maybe sell some of those stories to us as officers, to us as councillors, because we are the voice that speaks to the members and residents when they come to us and say, why is this doing this? Councillor Jones-Evenson, I will move on.
Thank you, and thank you for your support and good words about the service. I think, you know, you're right. We do need to look at how we deliver services, and I think it's not just about our leisure centres, but all our services, because this is obviously what we do at One Leisure supports across the council as well, and into the wider community. I mean, for instance, we're just about to start, I think, aren't we, Mr. Wins, working with public health on a falls prevention programme, which is really good. I mean, that, you know, how important with your previous role, Councillor Mosder, you'll understand how important that is. And the referral scheme, we call it the GP referral scheme, but that goes wider and deeper now. We're actually able to work with young people's, you know, like the Youth Trust, for instance, they are able to refer their young people to go to the gym. And of course, the other thing is the statutory responsibility we have as a for I think it's year 6 swimming lessons for children. So we do actually deliver statutory duties as well. But I just wanted to say, you know, we could have put more in the report, but again, wasn't really certain why you wanted the report. But anyway, we've had a report, we've had an opportunity to discuss it. I've heard you back. And if anybody would like to go visit one of the leisure centres, or I can arrange that. If you want to contact Mr. Minns directly, you know, it's our council's leisure service, and anyone who hasn't had a chance to go and visit them, they you know, it's an open invitation.
I think you'll find most of the committee actually do at some point use the leisure services. It was just a question of why is the report here, you know, how we satisfied, but actually what would have been good to see in this report is the positive stuff that is being done that we've only heard of this evening.
If anyone hasn't been, you know, then just let us know.
I will move on to the next item, which is 12 Performance Management Framework 49 to 54. Has any of the committee got any comments on this at all? Well, I was going to be, so if you are, then it stops me being mischievous.
I'm not sure I understand it, to be honest, but then I didn't see the report a year ago. I mean, clearly Councillor Jordan and Councillor Stevens are experts because they have access to this according to the report. But I really don't understand. And I don't know if this is the forum for us to do it. Maybe we need to have, I think, do you have informal meetings of scrutiny? I don't know if you do, but maybe it's something you could do as part of that at some point in the future. Thank you.
I'm going to pass over to the chief exec wants to, because I can't see anybody dashing up to ask questions on this at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate that this is simply an update for the committee following the report that originally came to you. I also appreciate your comments entirely, Jeff, because reading it again after having read it when it was written, yeah, I can entirely understand your comments. I think what the committee would benefit, and indeed what all members would benefit from, is using the member training opportunities and briefing opportunities that we have to set up a session for members on how we're going to use data and use Power BI in particular in the upcoming quarter performance management report and the data that we have available generally now to people, because I think visually this works better than seeing it written on a piece of paper.
I think that
Sorry, Chair, I think it's a good suggestion because if this is what's going to be used for QPMR reporting in the future, it's crucial for people who are involved in scrutiny. I'm never quite sure how much time is spent on the QPMRs at the moment. You know, that's no disrespect to anybody, but I've spent less and less and less over my years on this council because it's never seemed that relevant, really, and it is relevant. So if this is going to help, I want to know about it for my last few months on this council. Thank you.
I think it's a really good point, and I think one of the things, I don't know if the rest of the committee agrees, that this council is really good when you're first a councillor of having induction sessions, and that all happens when it's a bit of a minefield. Trying to find a way around this building. I had to find D3 today. It's the most logical building on the planet, to be fair. But you still try and find rooms and things like that are weirdly signposted, and where's conference rooms 5 and is it on floor 5? It's just illogical. But my point is that we have really good induction when we first become councillors, but then that really is it. And there is lots of stuff that could be done as full councillor sessions that can be done as a hybrid. So we could actually have more updates on stuff like that, to have training courses, because it is really important that we are up to date and we can do it. And then that's the councillor's choice whether they go or not. And then if there's not enough, we can name and shame them afterwards that they didn't bother to go. But it would be really good. I pass over to the chief exec.
So thank you. A QPMR is coming to Cabinet and Corporate Scrutiny in September. So what I will ask the team to do is put a couple of dates in the diary for a session to run through how the data analysis and the data presentation will work moving forward. Separate to that, and on your point, Councillor Mosdale, there is a group that's run by our learning and development team. It's specifically aimed at councillor training and councillor development. So I think specifically if there are any issues at any point in time that members feel generally members would benefit from training or briefing on, then we can always raise it through those groups as well. I know Councillor Jarman sits on that group, so I'm sure he would be happy to feed into that group anything from members generally in any case.
Councillor Jarman.
Yeah, I'd just like to commend what the Chief Executive said. I think I've attended 3 of the fairly lengthy training sessions on the Power BI system. They are excellent. The system contains an enormous reservoir of data and information about the council, about our island, about demographics. I know that some of it is shared with Hampshire and overlaps a bit with that, but it does give you the ability to go down to a very discrete level, certainly down to a parish and a ward level, and look at the demographics and the informatics for that ward. You can raise back up and look at the island. It's gradually being populated. The training sessions are excellent. They involve a mixture of staff and councillors. I would say the number of councillors attending those training sessions so far has been relatively low, but I would commend every councillor here, even for the time when they are no longer councillors, if they wish to contribute to the workings of the council or to comment on the information which is coming out. That does provide a very good resource. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move to members' questions. I want to make sure that we haven't had any questions in writing today, have we? And I will limit members' questions so that we're not here at 9 o'clock tonight. So are there any other members' questions? And can we keep them detailed and quite tight, please? Because we have had a heavy agenda this evening. There's a surprise. It's Councillor Jarman. Hello.
Thank you, Chair. I was giving the members of the committee the chance to go first. They're also members of the council, so it's only fair they get that. So my first question relates to, I started doing a fairly deep dive, which I assume will come out of the committee later on, about the finances of the island schools and about the recent summary that was provided. Of course, on the 1st of July this year, Carisbrooke and Medina formed into the HISP Multi-Academy Trust, but the forward projections of finances of the council, which are included in the finance papers at the moment, still continue to include their net operating elements, and some at the bottom, their contribution as an overall element within the calculations. I assume those figures will be revised because they no longer fall into the Isle of Wight Council remit. The money that they were holding has actually been transferred, I understand now, to the HISP Multi-Academy Trust, and is therefore not an issue for consideration by the council. Would that be a true reflection?
So before that's answered here this evening, can we just note for that question, the only reason that we have an officer here that can answer that in detail this evening is because we looked at the cabinet report for the place planning. I personally feel that that question should be taken to the relevant committee, which would be Children's Services and Education, and then it could be put in writing to the officer. So I don't want a written answer today. There is a meeting coming up next week, I believe, a special meeting. Would you be happy, Councillor John, because I do want to make sure it gets a response correctly from the officer. Would you be happy to re-ask that question at the Children's Services Committee? So Councillor, sorry, I keep doing councillor, I do apologise. So Mr Whittaker could actually at that committee answer that with the appropriate chair, and actually it would be good for the whole of that committee who are part of that to take on board as well, rather than corporate. Would you be happy with that, Councillor Jarman?
Yes.
Like that answer. Any other questions?
Yes.
We'll have one more, so you choose one.
Oh, only one. Okay, one general one then.
Yes,
rather than a
please.
specific
Relevant
one.
to this committee. Thank you, Councillor
A
John.
general one relative, yes, to this committee. So in the papers we've got this evening, as in other documents that we see for other committees, it's not only this committee. I see the issue of confidentiality being defined as between cabinet and external third parties. Some of those matters relate to longitudinal issues, which may not be resolved in the short term. Indeed, many of them have been going on, as Councillor Brodie spoke earlier, for some considerable time. I would like to have an assurance that in the future, agreements made between the council and external third parties are not restricted to confidentiality between the cabinet and external parties, but between the council, in whatever form that makes, and external parties, because we will in 10 months' time be moving to a committee system, and that reference and that exclusion and limitation of confidentiality will therefore become irrelevant and more complex than it would otherwise need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, but that does bring into question that the committee that are looking, we've moved the governance and the intricacies of setting up the governance to audit committee rather than come to this committee. That might be a question that does get, we can answer it this evening, but also is relevant to go to audit, to go part of the governance, because I can also see in the future with the committee system that there will be some negotiations that have to be made actually within a select few. Having been a cabinet member before, there are some things that do need to be made, you know, within that environment. And I get that everybody should have the right to hear that information, but when things are at crucial stages of negotiations, then it isn't right to put that into a public domain, especially when you're dealing with private operatives. Could I suggest that that is a really important question on confidentiality and sharing of information, but it is appropriate for to go to audit to discuss how those type of items will be dealt with when we move it to a committee system. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair, and we'll note that as an issue to raise in the work that's being done on the future governance arrangements in the movement to a committee system.
Are you happy with that answer, Councillor Jarman? Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'm 3 minutes over what I expected to run the meeting at, but I think the school place planning was really important. Thank you all for your time this evening. And I'll see you all tomorrow for an exciting full council.